good evening, everyone, and welcome to this edition of HRI Talks. My name is Garvey Bailey, and I will be your moderator for tonight's presentation. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to share that the offices of HRI are located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Ottawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples, and the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I am in Toronto, which is Treaty 13 and Williams Treaty lands. I invite you right now to think about decolonizing your own mindset as we think about healthcare and how to care for each other. We have registrants from all over Canada joining us this evening, and also a number of international participants as well. So thank you all so much for being here. Tonight, we'll explore how people and their communities respond to trauma and emergencies, what actually helps reduce psychological impacts and supports recovery, and how mental health considerations can be better integrated into emergency response planning. Now, just a little bit about HRI Talks, if this is your first time. HRI Talks are about presenting new ideas, discoveries, and studies that are helping to transform the mental health and use he- substance use health landscape in Canada and beyond. HRI works with some of North America's most influential scientists, researchers, people with lived and living experience, and clinicians to deliver these sessions. Now, tonight's presentation will begin. This is how it's going to break down. There's a moderated conversation with our expert panelists. That is about 25 minutes long. And then after that, we open the floor to you. This is such a crucial part of these talks. We would love to hear from you. So please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any point during the event. And what we're going to try to do is answer as many questions of your questions as possible. So please do think about those questions, hop into that Q&A, jot them down, or as they come to you, just jot them down on a piece of paper and then write them down as we get closer to that 25-minute mark. Closed captioning and live transcriptions are available for this event. So all you need to do to enable these features, click on the closed caption. That's the CC. You'll see it, the CC button on your screen. You can also turn on live translation through your Zoom settings. If at any point you need support, we've added some resources in the chat. So something like this cannot happen without our generous support. HRI Talks are generously supported by our contributors, with special thanks to our presenting sponsor, CIBC. Okay, are we ready to go? Yes, we are. I want to introduce our expert panel. Matthew Conte is coming to us from Alberta. He is the Chief and Director of Emergency Management at the Jasper Fire Department. Thanks for being here, Matthew. Dr. Margaret McKinnon is a professor at McMaster University and holds the Homewood Research Chair in Mental Health and Trauma. Thank you so much for being here, Margaret. Sue O'Sullivan is the chair of the International Network Supporting Victims of Terrorism and Mass Violence and executive director, Canada, Leadership in Counterterrorism and Terrorism Alumni Association. Thank you for being here, Sue. Thank you all three for being part of this talk. I want to just dive right in, if that's okay. Mental health is increasingly part of the conversations about emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. This is what HRI does so well talking about. I want to, I do wonder why this issue of emergency preparedness and our mental health around it is receiving so much attention right now. And maybe I can start with you, Dr. McKinnon.
Sure. So please call me Margaret.
Okay.
Um, so firstly, though, I'd like to say, circumstances are really changing around the world. We're seeing an increase in political tensions, geopolitical tensions. Our environment is changing. And as Matthew has told us about before in other symposiums like this, we're facing wildfires across Canada. We're facing threats that, previous generations in many ways did face. For example, the greatest generation during World War II. But we're seeing those threats on the rise again. And I think really being prepared for those circumstances helps us to be safer and to feel safer as well. And mental health is a big part of that.
Yeah. Um, those are natural disasters. Sue, I know that you're zipping around the world speaking to many different people about these issues. Why is this at the forefront of folks' minds right now?
I would echo what Mark talked about, the current geopolitics. What happens in other countries shows up in our communities. And then I think the one I'd really want to add is the rapid evolution of social media, AI, deep fakes, mis and disinformation, and in the background, people pushing messages. I could give you numerous examples of information that's put out that on purpose that is very detrimental to people that are involved in that. And then the other, where people are looking for information, and are they getting the best support and information, like what this provides with HRI, in order to ensure that they're accessing the best mental health and psychosocial resources that may be available to them. But the other is, and I am a former victims ombudsman for Canada as well, so I need to put this out there. People with lived experience, victims, survivors, family members, first responders, all those impacted, and that impact can go well beyond communities nowadays with the constant media around and communication around what is going on. And much of it really relies on, if you get misinformation out there in a critical incident, really relies on the relationship and trust that you with the
Mm,
communities and the leaders in the community spend years developing, so that you can get in front of a camera and say, this was not what actually happened. This was either a deep fake, and it's going on. And that trust and relationship that you build ahead of time is going to be critical. So I just wanted to add that, but I also want to add the importance of a victim's voice. And I'm very broad, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the next question. But
mhm.
the important to have people who have been impacted to be able to have their voice at the table when you are discussing how to go about this. People with lived experience where can tell you where the gaps are. People often ask me, I'm former federal ombudsman for victims of crime, what are the issues for victims? I said, well, actually, they've been telling us for years. We just haven't
Yeah.
been listening. And so you need to include their voice at the table. I include first responders of that, of course, at every phase that you go forward.
Speaking of that lived experience, Matthew, I mean, being in Jasper, how long have you been chief there, real quick? You've
Just
been
over 5 years now.
just over 5 years. So you have seen some things. You are within a community, living within a community, working within a community. Um, and and I wonder if this is all resonating with you, that what Margaret and Sue about the the real threat of disinformation, all of those things. What are you seeing on the ground as chief there?
Absolutely. Disinformation is probably one of the biggest things that I think plays a toll, especially on first responder mental health. For those of us that were on the ground in 2024 during the wildfire, we saw firsthand how that fire affected the community, how it moved through the community. But obviously, through a lot of social media, disinformation is shared. You're starting to get a lot of theories coming about as to what happened. And obviously, that takes a pretty significant mental health toll on the members as they know it's not true.
Mm,
But again, there's still a lot of confidentiality clauses and everything else. They can't really openly speak to events that everything happened without sharing information that they probably shouldn't be. So it does take a pretty significant mental health toll, and something that we definitely dealt with quite a lot in 2024 and even continuing on to this day.
mhm. That part of continuing on to this day, we're going to get to that part of it for sure. When we think about what we're talking about, Matthew, was a natural disaster, but there's also human
Yeah.
caused emergencies in the mix as well. And I'm wondering about the differences in the approach to these two things, both the natural disasters and human caused emergencies. Is there a difference in the way that they're tackled, in terms of thinking about trauma and preparedness? Sue, I'm going to get you to I'm going to throw that one at you.
Well, I'm going to touch on, I know it's brief time, I'm going to touch on 3 points.
Sure,
So the
please.
first is, and I talked about it briefly, what are the issues for victims, survivors? And if I may, I'm going to use the term victims, but it's inclusive, and I'll explain circles of impact in a minute. But we really want to look at it in terms of a continuum. So
Yeah.
obviously everyone would want prevention to work. But when prevention doesn't work, perhaps there's an opportunity for early intervention. But then sadly, then an actual event occurs or critical incident occurs. And then once that occurs, as you go along the continuum, there will be a legal process. If in fact the person responsible, it's you say human caused, it can be terrorism, it can be mass shootings, it can be mass victimization, a car ramming, those kinds of things. There will be a legal process. If in fact the person is still is not deceased, then it will be a criminal process, or as we've seen in some cases, not criminally responsible. But it will also be could be an inquest or inquiry, as we saw with the Nova Scotia shooting. It was an inquest. So the message I want out here is that what we often do is we prepare for the front end, and then when a crisis happens, we're not very good at doing the medium and the long term. And for people who have been impacted, whether it be criminal in nature or a disaster, not man-made, for many people, it's a lifelong journey, the impact of these from a mental health and a psychosocial. And I'll give you an example. Following, let's say, the attacks in the Bataclan Theater in Paris and the other events that day, it's years before it gets to trial. People who are involved in that, be you a witness, be you a survivor, be you a family member, you're going to need support in that 6 years in between. So we need to be thinking about what do we have in place in the short, medium, and long term. And the third point I want to make is around, we know what the predictable challenges will be in any major incident. We know that. We know it's going to be around identification of victims. The number one anybody's going to have, for example, we saw recently, sadly, in Tumbler Ridge, where's my loved one? Are they hurt? Are they injured? Where are they? And they need immediate information. So if you haven't thought about that pre-planning in terms of that communication, which very much can be prepared for. And then in terms of obviously the management of, the response for the families of victims, it's going to be communication. It's going to be a number one issue. And then you're going to get into impact on first responders. And I just want this message to get out there. If we want our first responders who deal with so much to be able to help people at these scenes, they need to be healthy themselves. We need to invest in the health of our first responders. And I'm including broadly, could be mental health providers, could be peers, could be fire, police, paramedics, city, all of that. We need to invest in the people that are preparing for and responding to. And the last thing I want to mention is what makes it different when it's man-made is some of those issues really come into. First of all, I want to say this. We have excellent first responders in our country. We have really good emergency plans, but every community will come with its own organizational structure and capacity. We have seen many of our major attacks in small rural areas. It could be James Smith Cree Nation, Tumbler Ridge, La Loche, Nova Scotia, Portapique, 120 people. So when you look at these, the message I have is that there's common ground on what the needs in the pre-planning and the response and the longer term is prepared for. But at the same time, you might be in Peel Region where you have a massive casualty bureau. You might be in a small rural community where it's 3 people in a city facility with cell phones. The point being is you need the function. You have to design the function around that common ground around what your capacities are until more help can get in place. And so the protocols, I usually identify about 22. There's a few more, but my message is this. That's what's different is the added capacity, the extra training, the extra expertise that's going to be required. And if you haven't considered these, I'll give you one example. Las Vegas, 20-some thousand people fled the October 1st music festival.
Mm-hmm.
The FBI had pre-planned and had in place a one-pager seeking victims. They were able to, within several days, identify thousands of people that were there, potentially that needing the support and the help. I could go in further, but I can't because of time, about how they did this. My point is you need to be thinking about, and when people say, well, I don't think it'll happen in my community, well, I'm just going to say Tumbler Ridge, I'm going to say Portapique, I'm going to say Toronto, I'm going to say, what happened in Jasper. So these are the kind of things that you need to be, it's about pre-planning, and it's about, I have to say this, it's not just about partnerships and collaboration ahead of time. It's about establishing partnerships and relationships and nurturing those over time so that when the crisis happens, you know who's all your teammates are in your different agencies to do that. And I'll just finish up with the last thing I want to say about that is if I'm going to use one piece of research here around PTSD, because I was in Las Vegas about 5 or 6 years after the attack. And Dr. Ann Vers was talking about a study. We think, when does PTSD happen? They did a study, and I have, if anybody wants afterwards, there's 2 studies that speak to this. The highest prevalence of PTSD with first responders is 5 to 6 years after the attack.
Wow.
Why is that important? You need to be planning about that as leaders within first responder communities to be able to know that. So research does drive and should drive action. And so, and I think that's, I better stop there, but I just want to say that it really comes down to pre-planning that continuum, considering it in the short, medium, long term. We're not doing well in the medium, long term. And I'm going to make this comment. We are the 25th anniversary of 9/11. I work with an organization out in New York, Voices, that is around for 25 years. And I will tell you, the people providing most of the support 25 years later is civil society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is civil society, NGOs, people that are committed to this. And so I just want to say that really it is about looking at that entire continuum and making sure that you've done the pre-planning and you have that in place. And the last thing, exercise. How many people, and I ask you this too, Matthew, have done a tabletop training scenario or a real training scenario where you've tested the human side, where you've tested your response to victims, where you've tested your response to your own members in your phased response? So we've done it at an international level. Port's available if anybody's interested. But so I'll stop there. I try and keep it short. I
I,
get passionate.
I mean, Matthew, I mean, that question really does, it is naturally coming to you at this point. You know, having gone through the Jasper fires, is there the mental health parts of responding to this with a full community? Do you feel like, as a first responder and leading first responders, that you're getting enough supports in thinking about the long tail of mental health through a natural disaster?
Well, kind of going back to Sue's original question there about the exercises and the planning around
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we could be doing a better job at that rate. We focus a lot on hazard mitigation and planning and efforts going into a response, and especially really focusing on the response as well too. We've done some ESS or emergency support services exercises to set up our teams on how we're going to care for our community. But I think there's definitely opportunity there for us to grow and learn from, especially when it comes to the recovery side of things now. Again, we've always kind of talked about this in emergency management. We do a very good job of planning for our response and mitigation work and ahead of the time. But I think we lack overall as an organization across the country when it comes to emergency management. Do we plan and prepare enough for the recovery side of things?
Yeah.
So yeah, we've definitely learned some things there. We've changed a lot of mental health programs and supports within our own department post 2024, as well as actually looking at community-led organizations as well too. We've had outside organizations come in and set up mental health supports for community residents in town. Typically, we'll see that on the anniversaries. Again, we have another anniversary coming up, so we'll continue to see that supports in place. And we're starting to utilize actually within our own fire service now, a lot of these third-party companies and organizations actually come in and do a lot of our follow-ups and our recovery supports for mental health for our members. And as well as we've actually incorporated into bringing them in to actually start working with outside of the fire service. There were a lot of people involved in our response as an organization from the municipality. We had volunteers, municipal staff from all different branches and divisions. So we're really focusing on making sure that they're getting the supports that they need as well too. In the fire service, we've done a lot better over the last 5 years of making sure mental health is on the forefront of everybody's responsibilities. I don't think it's carried over enough to the supporting agencies that come in and assist us from elsewhere within our municipality. So it's a really good focus on us right now.
Well, I think that's a great answer because I really want to ask you, Margaret, about those policies on the levels where folks like Matthew are getting supports. Like, is there policy in place, and what are the shifts that need to happen policy-wise in tackling mental health during either natural disasters or human-caused emergencies?
No, thank you. And thank you, Matthew, for describing that so well. We think about, as Sue was saying, from the prevention, the time the incident happens, the immediate aftermath, the short term and the long term. And right now we're focused on prevention and often on saving lives, protecting property, and we have to do that. That has to be a priority. But at the same time, we need to bake into that preparing for supporting and maintaining the mental health and well-being of the community and those impacted. And that's the victims themselves It's the circle of impact, which Sue will talk about. Our friend Mary Fletchett, who is the executive director of Voices, will talk about. It's the family members, the first responders, and then the wider community. And we know that the mental health and well-being impacts extend to all of those groups. We know as recently as just 2 weekends ago, someone tragically lost their life to suicide in Portapique. And that was a member of the community where they have continued to see suicides after that shooting, now 6 years later. And that's not uncommon. As Sue was saying, PTSD is emerging 5, 6, 10, 20 years later. And what we often hear said, and has been said to the 9/11 families, you should be over this by now. Things should have gotten better. That is the exact opposite of what happens in so many cases. And we need to recognize that healing from trauma is not linear. It's up and down. It looks more like this. And we need to provide long-term supports to everyone impacted across all those stages, including the primary victims, but also their family members, supporters, first responders, healthcare workers, and then the wider community. And we need community level intervention as well. And those can be supported by building community, as both Matthew and Sue have said, before the events occur. So how do we prepare before so that we're in community when these events happen to support one another?
Um, Thank you for that, Margaret. You bring up the idea of community supporting and having having the system in place beforehand, but in a situation like Jasper
Yeah,
in 2024, there is a community that is still
Yep.
reeling. There's a community
absolutely.
that is still recovering. Um,
Absolutely.
and so the preparation and the recovery, I feel like is happening, kind of has to happen simultaneously. And I wonder, Matthew,
Yeah.
about for you, um, learning about supporting mental health during the emergencies is one thing, but then there are the months that follow, and then on top of it, you have to get the preparedness for what the next thing might be. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing on a community level. Um, what are people saying? How are you managing that PTSD that might hit a full community?
Well, it can be quite challenging because obviously everybody's experiences are different,
Yeah.
and they will, psychological injury doesn't affect everybody the same way. So we have to be pretty broad scale about it as we look at it, especially from a community perspective. Um, when we set up support groups and everything inside our own first responder agency, it's easy to have after action reviews and talk a little bit more about details and kind of what happened. We talk about this stuff not to relive the events that have come up, but obviously to learn from things that could have gone better, ways we can change our processes to move things going forward. So those are very important conversations to have, but they're not conversations that you can also have within the community. Um, we have a host or a wide variety of residents that, lost their homes, lost their properties, are
Mhm.
going through a lot of mental health issues right now. But we also have a lot of people that are still going through mental health issues that did not lose anything. Their properties are fine. What they're feeling is a lot of survivor's guilt, I guess, when it comes to that, because their friends and family have lost so much and they're still fine and trying to make do with everything that they have. So yeah, we really got to look at this as a multifaceted approach when we, depending on our audience and who we're actually working with when it comes to mental health supports. But during emergencies and everything else in the planning, yeah, we go in our service. We have always had pretty good mental health supports in place. We're pretty fortunate in Jasper, where that's always been kind of top of the mind. We have a few very good advocates for mental health in the fire service within our own department.
Mm.
So those places or those supports were actually in place. Really good for our typical day-to-day response incidents, obviously 2024 and the impact of the community and the responders themselves. Like I said, we had 8 responders that lost their homes that night that were actually on the ground fighting fires and trying to do everything they can to protect their community. So it took a pretty significant toll. And even outside of those 8, everybody in this community, we're a smaller community, everybody knows everybody, pretty friendly. There wasn't a single person here that obviously wasn't affected, had a friend or family member knew somebody that suffered some kind of loss. So making sure that those mental health supports were available during our response was very critical as well too. Not so much during the night of the Ember shower and the impact of the community, but immediately following, next day and over the next few weeks, had outside organizations on standby that could come into the station and meet with members one-on-one, pull them aside, just making sure we're doing that check-in. And again, going into recovery, we've learned a lot. We've really redeveloped a lot of our programs, developed new mental health policies, additional funding to support our members. So all that stuff is actually in place now, and we still kind of really push our members to do annual check-ins for the ones that aren't receiving, regular support.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you for a comment, Sue. You're right on top of it. I love it. You're prepared.
I just get, there's so much opportunity here with this session. I know we're going to questions shortly, but I just want to say
Yes.
this. Leadership is important.
Yes.
Okay, leadership is important. I had the privilege of listening to the leader who responded on behalf of Sandy Hook, and he walked through his journey, and everything was offered to the members and the rest of that, and nobody took it. And he described his personal experience of how it impacted him physically and all the rest of that. And so within a few days, he went public to said, I'm going to seek help because of what I had to deal with there as a commander. And a few days later, almost 700 people signed up. So I'm
Wow.
just using that as one example. But the other thing I want to speak to is about the importance of peer. The importance of peer. I did do 30 years in policing, and so I'm very familiar with the first responders community and the stigma that gets, and we have evolved, but we're still seeing massive amounts of impact, psychosocial suicides, the rest of that. So we have to continue to look for the different avenues. I want to give one kind of, maybe I'm jumping ahead of the first question, inspiring, obviously can emerge, but the other one I want to inspire is, and I'm not speaking, please, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Toronto Police Service, I'm not speaking on behalf of other police service, but I did have the privilege of chairing the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police National Working Group on these issues for over 6 years. So proud. We have like about easily 40 champions across this country that are sharing all these lessons learned and what they're doing. But part of what they're doing is they have actually embedded, not all, but I'll just use Toronto as an example, not speaking on their behalf, but they have embedded into the incident command structure. I know it's ICS, IMS, and gold, silver, bronze across the country, but they have embedded another pillar in there so that they have done all the pre-planning around. They work closely with the hospitals. They just did a training exercise, I think, with over 16 hospitals involved. They understand that the gathering of this information, the early intervention, which can prevent further mental health problems if you get the appropriate early intervention, is in place. So you're seeing these new pillars as part of emergency management, and that would be my message. Mental health and psychosocial supports is integral to a good, not just the entire continuum along what we need to have in place in our communities. And so when we start to see that alignment of mental health and psychosocial and peers and community and faith and all the rest that comes with that, because we have not touched on, we don't have time, we did not touch on cultural relevancy. We did not touch on children and youth. And the opportunities that are available when we listen to our youth. Manchester Arena, if you have a chance, Google Be Prepared. It was done by the youth for the youth that were there. It's an amazing initiative. So I guess it's about this ability to collaborate, to be respectful and understand how you all can plan together, respect each other's mandates, but do that common strategic plan to make sure that we listen. I listen to Marg and the experts at all the different institutions you're involved with, Marg. And so it is critical to all that we do. And I will just mention one last thing. Be aware and know what's out there and available to you. There's a new report that talks about what do you do with, quote, disaster sites. So we had Tumber the Ridge. Do you reopen the school? What do you do? There is now some guidance available on that for 4 different types that have been kind of looked at. My point being is, as you pre-plan, there is a tremendous amount of information and lessons learned that we can all look at and within our own communities to develop what will work for us in our communities in a mutual aid as well.
That's wonderful because I want to throw this open to everyone that's on the call right now. We have a poll that we like to throw something out there to just get you to think about what's happening in your own community. So using these choices in this poll, how prepared do you feel for an emergency in your community? Maybe you haven't really thought about it at all. Maybe you've thought about it, but you haven't prepared. Maybe you have some general plans in place. You have a plan and you feel completely ready. That's like my brother, my older brother. He's got all the plans. And maybe you're not sure what preparedness would look like. So choose which one, and I'll take a look at what's happening in the minds of the people that are here listening right now. So 33% of people say, I have some general plans in place, which seems about right. I have a plan and feel ready. About 30% of folks said that. Only 7% of people say I haven't really thought about it. And I think that that is kind of a sign of our times that we are thinking about it. Um, where are you seeing, though, the promising approaches to mental health preparedness and recovery, and and where do you see the gaps in that in mental health preparedness, Margaret?
Thank you, Garvia. And I think, as Matthew has talked about and Sue, we are seeing increasing awareness in first responder communities of really caring for the mental health of their members, and also for leaders coming forward and saying, I've faced these challenges and I'm willing to be open about them, and I hope that you can also seek the help that you need. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I'm hopeful that you can seek the help that you need. That's been a big transformation, I think, over time. What I really think about often is communities that are impacted. So we often focus really heavily on victims, as we should, the direct victims, but victims is a very wide word, right? It's the family members and then the broader community in particular. So in Tumbler Ridge, think about a small community where they've lost their children, where mental health has come in very briefly, mental health supports, and then leave. So how do we build capacity, particularly within smaller communities? So when the unexpected happens, that supports are already in place. And we can do that through preparedness planning, right? We can prepare for that. But we also think about communities where there's, a need for commemoration. So people often talk about, having a memorial where members of the communities are able to gather together to grieve their losses. That could be the loss of homes, that could be, unfortunately, the loss of people. How do we come together in community to support one another? And that's a form, again, of mental health support. And I think building those social connections, we know that the single greatest predictor of who will develop PTSD after being exposed to a trauma across all kinds of populations is having social support. So having a social network. And for people who feel isolated and who feel lonely, we can help them to build those social supports. We also know that equity deserving communities are disproportionately impacted by emergencies and disasters. And Garvia and I did some work together around that during the pandemic, right? So we need to recognize who in our communities will be vulnerable, to look for those individuals before something happens. So I was doing an event in the city of Hamilton last week, and they're going out into the community now and finding folks who don't have air conditioning, who don't have access to cooling, to food during the summer, and they're identifying those folks now to support them when we hit the inevitable heat waves that we're going to face this summer. So it's not just waiting for people to come to us. We need to go out and find people, especially folks like older folks who are vulnerable, disabled folks who are vulnerable, and prepare for what could happen. And that's a way of supporting psychological safety and mental health in and of itself.
Um, Sue, you've been around the world. Are there best practices that are happening in other jurisdictions, in other places, other countries even,
Absolutely.
that we could be thinking about or should be considering when we think about the approaches to preparedness and recovery?
Oh, absolutely. There are many sites that are available. One, if you're from the United States or Canada, there's one, the National Mass Violence Center out of in the U.S. actually has extensive materials available to you in many different aspects. But I want to touch on this one comment about how do we reach people?
Hmm.
Because what we want to do is find the people in our communities that are the door in to the unheard,
Mm.
the people, because we haven't talked about public trust in institutions right now, right? The number one issue is public trust, community engagement, and member wellness when you're around these issues. People able that are able and healthy to be able to support. When you know your community, and the health people know the community, the public health, the police, the people that are in homes, firefighters are in homes all the time, people that can access, particularly with people who have a mistrust of institutions. So the people that can open the door to the unheard. that's who we also want the assistance of. It could be faith. It could be people from diverse groups, diverse backgrounds, Indigenous or LGBTQ plus. I mean, all of these areas where we know where there's key leaders who have the trust of the people in the community that will not come forward. And the other thing, and you touched on it, I think Margaret or Matthew, you did as well. People come in when there's a crisis and there's a government line and there's all the right. I constantly look at listening to the people who have been through this and what were those lessons learned. And we had the privilege, Mark, of listening to the mayor of Portapique, and she was amazing. And she was very upfront and sharing with us the lessons learned. But when you're from a small rural community, you have to look, I'm going to use the word almost bespoke, listen to your community. Where will they go? What will they trust to get these services from? And I am going to add a layer in now of AI technology, because we're seeing, I'm doing a lot of work looking at everything from governance, accountability principles, the rest, but also about the kind of the good things that can be made with it. And we're seeing that happen right now in areas where there isn't access to go to an office and see a therapist or a psychologist. So we're looking at the potential good of some of these, and there's much out there right now that's going up. We also know that there's huge issues around privacy, accountability, governance, and there's some and AI is creating new types of crime. And I'm under Chatham House rules, but I was at a huge conference where an expert in a certain area for years was being targeted online. Try and get support for that. That's going on over years. So we really need to be very strategic in looking at the right people in our communities that already have the door in, and how we are building those relationships, because it is about trust. And right now, that's one of the number one issues that all institutions are facing, is public trust. And how do you, in some cases, people say we need to rebuild it. I said, in some cases, you don't have it to start with.
That's right.
So you really do need to kind of really look at the people who, and the other is we're very fond of telling people what they need rather than listening to them tell us what they need and let it coming from them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You brought up AI, and I just wanted to remind folks that HRI Talks, there's a lot of talks on our YouTube channel, and we had an excellent talk. The last moderated session was about AI in mental health and in healthcare, and in substance use. It was excellent. So if you want to get more information on that, that's a good way to go. I want to start with some questions from the audience, from our attendees. Please remember to submit those questions in the Q&A. If you haven't, I want to throw the floor to Hilary Dort, our HRI Manager of Communications, who's going to share our first question. Hi, Hilary.
Hi, Garvia. Hello, everyone. Our first question from the audience is, what is your understanding of shared trauma, where both a person in a community or a victim and a responder share a similar experience? So this person is saying, for example, in a disaster or combat situation.
Matthew, do you want to take that one? Do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, for sure. To me, I guess shared trauma, I think Jasper went through it pretty well with what happened to our community. Our responders obviously seen significant loss and everything that was going on, and some pretty significant trauma as part of the response. But I think that shared trauma always plays through with the community members itself, right? Everybody calls our community home, very fond of where we live and very lucky to live here. Seeing that devastation, and everything that kind of happened to the community, your friends and families, what they've gone through, what they've suffered for as far as loss and destruction of their properties or their personal possessions. The members kind of went through the exact same thing on the response side of things as well, too. And not just our firefighters and our response there, but we had firefighters from, across Alberta into BC, as well as wildland firefighters coming in from internationally that were here to kind of assist. A lot of these people have been to multiple incidents and seen this across their communities and other communities they've been into. So I do think there is a good shared response to, I guess, that trauma as to the devastation and everything that's kind of happened into the community. I think it's pretty easy for our first responders to relate to what other community members are going through in Jasper.
Well, yeah, and especially in a community where the first responders are living within the community where the tragedies are taking place. As you said, you had members that lost homes. So sometimes the overlap is real. Like, I mean, it's the same people. Margaret, is there an approach that can be taken through mental health when you're dealing with first responders, and then, of course, community members when they, what is the balance there when you go in to start to tackle the mental health of both on both sides of that coin?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think part of it, I'm going to actually answer from the first responder perspective because I remember something that Matthew said about, folks responding and then community members being, could be angry about
Right.
speed or what's happening. And I think it's really important for all of us to take one another's perspectives, right?
Mm,
Just imagine that that person who's there, the firefighter who's responding, the police officer, the paramedic, their own home and their own family are also in danger, right? So how do we have compassion for that responder and grace around
right.
what they're doing? And I think that's really, really important for us as community members to remember. At the same time, when we're responding, of course, as a mental health provider, I also try to take the perspective of that person. And when I see them being irritable or having difficulty, I often think, what is happening in their life right now
Mhm.
that's driving this? And that can be hard to take that perspective, especially in an emergency, right? When we're under really difficult circumstances. But I think the more we try to consider one another, the better we can do in
Mhm.
understanding one another and supporting our own mental health in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just add to that too? Because I'll
Yeah.
speak to my former policing experience. I know what was helpful for the members in their shared trauma if they were with
Yeah.
someone's loved one when they died or they were holding them, and they feel that shared trauma. What was helpful to them was to know that the processes were in place to support those families, not just in the short term but the longer term. So they knew that yes, they would have their own experiences, and many officers, I'll only speak to my former service, but would keep those relationships actually for a lengthy period of time. Can be healthy, can be, all of that. But the other thing that I always find that really is helpful to people that are trying to cope is we asked them to provide a lot of information, fill out a lot of forms multiple times for multiple different agencies. And this is just feedback from people that have been there. If we could help people, how do you access these processes? Please help me fill out these forms. How do I do this? I don't understand your system. And I'm sure in fires, when people are trying to make, insurance claims and what will they pay for, what they not pay for, this causes a huge amount of stress on people. And so how can we help them, give them the tools to do that? And the last thing I want to mention, because I'm going to reflect back on some of my officers who, when they knew what was in supporting those families, it helped them. Okay. And I'm not saying that's for everyone, but I'm just saying in certain cases that was helpful to them. But the other is the FBI put out a brochure, and
Mm.
let's just listen to the title. I was there. Because people who were not injured in a major incident were not injured, did not suffer a loss, did not feel that they had the right to access those resources when we know the psychological impact that comes from this. And so kudos to the FBI Victim Services who identified that. And they identified it and put it out there. It says, no, you were there. You may not have been, but here's what resources are available to you. And please reach out, that kind
Mm,
of thing. So I think we really need to understand that many people have been hugely impacted. And now with the way that information is being sent out daily, instantaneously, people that are from other cities are being impacted. With
yeah.
what's the war in Iran, all that's going on there and the impacts of communities, people with loved ones, the Ebola. I mean, you can go down the list of people we have here in our own country, in our own communities who have relatives there. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted to kind of add that to the conversation.
Yeah. Margaret, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just say thank you so much. And I wanted to follow on that is that, we often fall into the trap when these events are happening of spending all our time watching TV and watching the media. And it can be really healthy to take a break, right? So to limit our exposure. There's important information that will be being conveyed by government on the radio and on the TV. And of course, we have to pay attention to that. But we don't want to fall down that rabbit hole of continuously watching that. We need to protect ourselves by taking a break from some of that when these events are happening.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. I have to take that advice to heart. I spent all day looking at videos from Belfast, and that was not good for my mental health. I'll tell you that. It has not been nice. Um, Another question, Hillary, please.
Yeah, I think this transitions actually nicely to the next question, which is in an era of social media, is misinformation becoming a public mental health issue during emergencies? And if so, what can be done about it?
Mm. Sue, do you want to start with that
Well, there
one?
is a tremendous
And then,
amount of work being done by different agencies to look at that. For example, the UN actually just put out a document on the gaps in supporting victims in relation to technology and what's happening that way. There is a significant amount of work that's going in there. Right now, we're having a conversation worldwide. Do we take youth under 16 and not let them use social media? I mean, there's many different perspectives on that. There's an organization out of the UK called the Molly Rose Foundation that's put out all kinds of public documents on that. And again, I think sometimes people want it. There's no either or here. We need a whole bunch of things in place. Perhaps that's part of the solution. Or, what tools we used to do parenting programs in our community, 150 a year. Well, now we would do that online. And how do you help parents give them the tools they need to understand what their children are facing and the rest of that? So there's many different aspects to do that. But in terms of mis and disinformation, the rapidity of it, and for example, there is huge consequences. There was a case, it doesn't matter, I won't say which country, but there was a case where a young girl had her image, just her normal image taken, and ended up on 28 porn sites because it was deep faked. And that person ended up committing suicide, and she did nothing wrong. Okay. And that's not, we've seen these stories. We've seen the different ones, with 764 in the COM, people from time of contact to time of, we've seen these publicly out there. So there is so much harm that's been, there is also some good things that are happening there and some good processes being put in place. I don't have the time on this, but if you want to follow up with me later, I'm on LinkedIn, send me a message and I can hook you up with some resources around that.
Yeah.
This is another thing that I think HRI Talks does so well. Having access to the speakers later on, if there's a wealth of information and links that can be shared at the end of our talk here, and for those that have signed up. Um, uh, Hillary, do we want to go to another question?
Sure, I think we have another one here. So, this is, I think, more broadly around experiencing a traumatic event, but what signs suggest that someone may need professional support following a traumatic event rather than simply needing more time to recover?
Mm. Margaret, can I start with you, and then I'm going to throw to Matthew about some maybe
Yeah.
some real world experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that immediately following a trauma, it's going to be normal to have responses like difficulty sleeping. You may find yourself startling very easily. You may almost feel as if you're not present in your body or in the world around you. And that's expected after a trauma. But when those symptoms continue for often more than 2 weeks or more than a month, and they're interfering with your life. So you're finding that it's difficult to go to school, it's difficult to do work, your family relationships are suffering, that is often a sign of needing help. We also know that folks do have difficult, if they think about, for example, harming themselves, taking their own lives, it's important to talk about suicide as well. If you're having any of those thoughts or those feelings, it's really important to reach out for help. We actually have a text and phone line now in Canada, 988, which you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they will provide support around any of those thoughts of self-harm that you may be having. We also have a website called Can Emerge, which we developed with support of the Public Health Agency of Canada. So who's been a huge supporter of that. And we actually have a self-assessment tool on that website that you can go through, and it will say, check your mental health. And you can see on that website whether you're having what is, a normal response to a highly stressful event, through to being injured and needing to seek support, to being in the red zone of critically injured, where you
Right.
need to reach out right now for help. And what that Check Your Mental Health tool will do is navigate you to free resources in Canada. So across the country, in your community, these are all evidence-based. And that tool is available to all Canadians. It was supported again by the Public Health Agency of Canada, and it's there for all Canadians. The federal government now promotes that as the tool for Canadians during emergencies and disasters. That's where they're asking us to go to get that sort of information.
Yeah, wonderful. Matthew, I imagine as chief, the conversations that much must happen, behind closed doors with your membership, with your colleagues, around reaching out for help, and how you foster that sort of environment within the service that says, it is okay to come in and talk to the chief about these things? Like how do you navigate these things in your day to day?
Kind of like I mentioned before, we do have pretty good programs in place for our members. We're pretty open and honest about it with our membership, to the point where we have a lot of supports and resources, leaflets, brochures, everything on our bulletin boards all around the station, as well as up in our training room. Everything can be accessed. We obviously understanding that not every single member on the department is comfortable coming right up to a chief level to discuss these type of
Sure.
issues. But we have very good peer support programs in place too, where we will have our members, again, being a smaller community, we see all of our members on a regular basis. We're getting pretty good at knowing our members and picking up on subtle behavior changes and everything else, where we can kind of identify things that are going wrong, especially for firefighter to firefighter, where they see each other a little bit more and interact a little bit more. So they will actually reach out to each other, take each other out for coffee, dinner, lunches, whatever it may be. That's all kind of covered by the department if they choose to go that route. Um, and again, we have a few good mental health advocates on the department
Mm.
that are really good at picking up on these signs from them as well too. But also just making sure that we're constantly reaching out and checking in with members. If we haven't seen them around or a while, we're seeing, a little more absences, and that's typically normal for that person. Just bringing them in and having an open and honest conversation about, hey, we're here to help and support you. And we really try and fight that stigma that's in the kind of the industry, right? I think over the last 10 years, the fire service has gone a lot better than we used to be, but I think there's still a long ways to go to end that stigma and making sure that people understand that it is all right to come forward. And if you need help, we're here to kind of help and support you, and we'll get you those supports that you need.
I think that peer-to-peer element of things is probably just so crucial. Like my my nephew is a firefighter here in my hometown, and he's taken courses now to be one of those peer support, so that they know that, oh, they can go to Tyson if they need to, speak to someone right away, and go play pool or whatever and talk about things. So I just love what's happening in the fire services, like across the board. We're just about out of time. So if we didn't get to your question, or you have maybe a comment to share, I'd love for you to reach out to us. You can find HRI's email address on the website. That's hriresearch.com, hriresearch.com. We have posted a link in the chat to a survey that we have, so you can share your feedback about today's session. The survey will also appear in Zoom right after the event. So we want to thank you so much in advance for taking the time to complete that survey. It looks like, do we have time for one more, or should I just go right to the last question, Hillary? I'm going to leave that up to you. What do you think?
I think you can go right to the last question. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. So, we have learned so much tonight from our expert panels. And to close the conversation, I'd like to ask each of you one last question. Um, you know, I know this is a huge question, but briefly, I just would love to know, what is one thing, or maybe a couple things, that people can do to help move this work forward in their own lives and in their own communities. Sue, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, I'm a big believer in connecting. And so you can play a role, it can be a small role or a bigger role in terms of the leadership and ensuring that you bring those key partners together. Because the answer is that we have those established, and I use the word relationships, not so much partnerships, because you can pick up the phone, even in a large city. If you bring the right people together, including community, NGOs, faith, and all the rest of that, you bring those right people together, you go through what you already have in place, because you're building off an established foundation
Mm.
of emergency management, right? So you're going to now look at what are those uniquenesses in terms of support. But it needs to be pre-planned. You need to look not just at the short term, but the medium and the long term. And the other is we talk about the long term as one of the biggest gaps, the medium and the long term, because there needs to be resources in order people want to get help, and there's no resources to get that help. And so the last thing I want to say is that, and it kind of ties into that message. When we talk about when we look at victims, and again, I use that broadly and very inclusive of circles of impact, but you need to do it with victims, not for
Yeah.
them. And you need to have their voices at the table. And the last thing I want to say, if I may, is I know there may be some people on this call, well, I know, Matthew, you're one of them, people who are and who have been through a critical incident, who are victims, who are survivors, who are peers, who are first responders. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you
Mm,
for the work that you do every day to keep us safe. And thank you for the courage and the inspiration to use your voice because, and I use again broadly, victims are partners in public safety. And
yeah.
this and they have led to massive change at national levels, international levels, because they had the courage to use their voice and inspire me every day to do what we do. So
Mm,
I call it weaving. We need to weave together
yeah. Yeah.
tapestry.
I love that. The weaving. Absolutely. Matthew, I'm going to turn this question to you. Things that people can do in their own communities, in their own lives to move this work of, of preparedness and mental health and all of those things forward. What should they be doing? Who should they be talking to?
For sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Sue, for your comments. I appreciate them. But I think it's important to note that like mental health preparedness is kind of everybody's responsibility. Um, yeah, we have leaders in our industry, leaders in the community that may take this on and really push it through. But again, it is everybody's responsibility. I would say if you are not seeing the type of programs or support networks in place in your own community that you're wanting to, advocate. Be that change. Push your counselors, push your CEOs, your leaders in your community to start working on this from a community level instead of just an organizational level. I think that's very important. I also think what we've seen in Jasper, people are definitely going to recover better if they have connection, have those friends, families, those supports in place, be able and open to talk to your friends and family if you're seeing things that are off. Again, there's courses out there that are geared towards families and friends of first responders. If you have a loved one that's a first responder and struggling, so you can actually pick up on some of those cues and work with them on there. I think we need to invest in those relationships, not in just the fire service, but community as a whole, and creating those support networks before these incidents happen
Yeah.
to help people recover better post recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Um, Margaret, a sentence or two about, what things that people that are going to leave this chat, they're going to talk to someone about what has stuck with them. What would you like them to be talking about in terms of preparedness and their mental health and their community kind of preparedness? What should they be chatting about?
I think I have things. Firstly, I want to echo Sue's thanks
Yeah.
to our first responder community. I grew up in a first responder family, and I would say the number one thing I learned from that is to help. That is our responsibility is to help others, right? And I think at the local level, I think it's getting to know our neighbors. It's so if something does happen, you know, knowing who they are, knowing who's vulnerable in our community, knowing what we might do together to support one another. I think also in prepared, I just recently did a simulation exercise in Toronto around wildfires, in fact, and we incorporated mental health and well-being into that exercise. And I think that, for those of you who are doing those preparation exercises, let's add that mental health component and you will see the tension that can emerge between, physical safety and operations and mental health and having to also prioritize that. And I think the more we practice, the better we'll get at that. But we have to practice, right? It's preparing, and preparedness is so important. So let's make those exercises incorporate both so that we can play it out so that if something heaven forbid does happen, that we're ready for that and to support both sides of the coin.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can believe it, we have reached the end of our time for this evening's HRI talk. I want to give so much thanks to our incredible panel, Matthew Conte, Sue O'Sullivan, Dr. Margaret McKinnon for joining us tonight, sharing your expertise. Special thanks to Norm Claire from the Unmarketing Group for technical support behind the scenes, making sure that we look good and sound good. Thank you, Norm. A recording of this HRI talk will be shared with you and posted on YouTube in the coming weeks. We encourage you to share it broadly to others who may be interested. Don't forget to subscribe to the HRI Talks mailing list so that you get a heads up on what's happening for our next event. Once again, I want to thank our presenting sponsor, CIBC. We are so grateful to all of our sponsors and supporters right across Canada and beyond for making these HRI talks possible. And of course, I'd like to thank you, at the attendees, the audience, for your keen interest, your excellent questions. Um, I'm so looking forward to seeing you next time. Have a great night. Good night, everyone.